Democratic Club for our June roundtable called Beyond June, Allyship and Advocacy Throughout the Year. I'm your moderator tonight. My name is Emily Mayer. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a public school teacher here in Bluffton. I serve as the third vice chair for the Beaufort County Democratic Party and as the first vice chair of the Young Democrats of the Coastal Empire, which is made up of folks under the age of 40 in Jasper and Beaufort counties. I had the privilege to head to Columbia this past session with a few of our panelists tonight to testify against one of the pieces of anti-trans legislation. To all of the members of the LGBTQ community listening tonight, whether out or not, the Bluffton Democrats want you to know that we love you, we support you, that your joy brings us joy, and we will continue to work until that joy can be limitless. We have the honor tonight to hear from some amazing individuals. First, we have Elaine Cogdill. Elaine Cogdill is a transgender non-binary member of our community. Elaine uses they, them pronouns. They are also a Beaufort County educator, as well as an advocate for all. They are in our community and they work as a chair of diversity, equity, and inclusion on the board of the board of directors of First City Pride Center in Savannah. So thank you, Elaine, for being with us tonight. We also have Charles Fricke. Charles uses he, him pronouns and is the first vice president of the Young Democrats of South Carolina. He also serves as the secretary of the YDSC LGBTQ+ Caucus. He is working on advocacy for LGBTQ rights in the state, including the hate crime ordinance in Columbia. He is currently working on trying to ban conversion therapy in South Carolina. He volunteers with LGBTQ+ organizations, including the Harriet Hancock Center in Columbia and South Carolina Pride. When he is not volunteering, he is working on finishing his PhD in chemical engineering at the University of South Carolina and is looking forward to getting to see everyone in person sometime soon. Charles, thank you so much for joining us. We also have Elias Valentine II, who uses he, him pronouns. Eli currently serves as the Greenville County Party Democratic Chairman. He is the first Latino and openly gay chair in the county history. He also serves as the co-chair of the LGBTQ caucus for the South Carolina Democratic Party. In addition, he owns 2 small businesses as a political consultant and working to mentor female student athletes. He also served as the South Carolina political director for Vice President Kamala Harris during her presidential run, as well as the inaugural Deputy Director of Voter Protection for SCDP during the 2020 cycle. He has won numerous awards for his volunteer work at both the state and county level. We also hope to have Phil Ford joining us tonight. Phil Ford uses he, him pronouns, and he is a lobbyist and advocacy consultant for South Carolina United for Justice and Equality, which is a coalition that envisions a South Carolina where everyone can thrive with a focus on the lived and legal equality of LGBTQ+ people. He successfully led the effort to defeat anti-trans legislation 6 times and ensured the inclusion of LGBTQ protections in the hate crime legislations this session. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to start with a few questions for each of you. We're going to start with Lane. Lane, what is one thing you would want people to know about the transgender community at large and in South Carolina?
Well, there's a lot of things, and I've been thinking about it sort of all day. And what I've landed on is sort of 2 things. One is that trans people are just regular people, just like anyone else. And 2 is, if you think about the people you know, you almost certainly know more trans people than you think you do. I talk to people a lot about trans issues who tell me that I'm the first trans person they've ever met. And I always tell them I'm the first openly trans person you've ever met, because I don't think a lot of cisgender and heterosexual allies even realize how many of us there are who are still in the closet, who are still too afraid to be open about our identities. I know for sure that like every place that I've ever worked in my adult life, I have met someone else who was LGBTQ, who was still in the closet, who told me that they really admired that I was so brave to be so out, but that they felt like they could never do that. And I think that sometimes, you know, when trans issues come up in discussion, people have this idea that like if you don't know anyone who's trans, that it's just like it's this sort of like side issue, right? Like it's something that only affects a few people. It's a very small percentage of the population. So something that I really wish that more people understood is that there are so many more of us, than most people realize, and that doing things that sort of signal your allyship to others is going to encourage more people to feel safe and comfortable coming out and living their truth. And I say that, with reference to adults like myself, but also, as an educator and having worked with young people, I say that for young people as well, because I have also every year as an educator, I've been an educator for 8 years now. Every year I've had at least one, if not more, students come out to me as trans and tell me that they wish they could be out and they wish they could tell their parents and their peers and their teachers, but they don't feel like they can. So I guess I just wish that people would sort of reframe the issues in their minds, from thinking of trans issues as something that only affects maybe like a few people, or something that you can look at a person and tell if they're trans or not, to something that definitely affects more people than you realize, and anyone that could be a part of our community.
That is so important. Thank you so much, Lane. Charles, in your bio, we got to hear of some great groups that you are involved with that we should look to get involved with. Can you speak about those groups? Let us know how we can get more involved in statewide groups and maybe some local groups as well.
So absolutely. And I really want to echo what Lane said. Finding and making community is so important, especially when you are like out. And so that's one of the biggest things we have to do in South Carolina is just organize, work on building community and making sure that people are safe, affirmed, and loved. So for organizations in the state, there are many good ones. For example, I'm first vice president of YDSC. We have the LGBTQ Caucus as part of YDSC, which is phenomenal. We have our meetings every second Saturday of the month, and this month is going to be a very busy month. So look for us on our Facebook or on our webpage, basically. But also, there are lots of local community groups. And oftentimes the way to find those is either through Facebook or through the internet. For example, I volunteered when I first came out. I didn't have Facebook, I didn't have any social media. So when I was coming out in 2018, I was trying to look for like a community organization, really kind of just get my bearings and like start finding and making community. And so for me, I ended up finding the Harriet Hancock Center, which is one of the oldest LGBTQ centers in South Carolina. And I started getting involved in that. I started working on fundraisers. I started working on basically making sure that, people who came to the center were affirmed, as well as that offered like educational material and resources and a guide to resources. And so from that, I kept on finding more and more just different parts of groups. I ended up meeting a couple of friends who were running for city council in Columbia. One of them as the first open gay man running for city council in Columbia. I met a whole bunch of people. And then from there, your network gets bigger and bigger the more you're involved. So I would really, really recommend, just looking up what are the organizations near you. Do you have like a PFLAG chapter? Do you have like any of the local LGBTQ centers near you? Because oftentimes that's a great way of just getting involved with the community, is actually finding a group near you that really focuses on affirming an education and building community.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Charles. Eli, what do you feel is the biggest challenge that the LGBTQ plus community is facing in South Carolina?
Well, thank you for the question, Emily. And I want to definitely start with where Charles kind of started with. It's organization. I believe we need to work collaboratively from the upstate to the low country to make sure that we're in collaboration, not competition, to be able to advocate appropriately for all of our issues. There are different folks that represent our community, and that's the beauty of the LGBTQ plus community. And as we continue to grow, we need to continue to work collaboratively, again, because it's about addition and not subtraction. So many times when you start to organize advocacy groups or issue groups, competition comes in, jealousy comes in, and we have to remember the big goal. And the big goal is equality. And that has to be the front and center thing that we focus on, so that we're doing the work and we're about the work. And another challenge I really feel that we need to address, and it's one of the reasons I ran for the co-chair position of the South Carolina Democratic Party LGBTQ caucus, we have to change the face of leadership. If you look at some of the most prominent organizations around South Carolina, their boards have no diversity. There are no trans members. There are no African-American members or no Latino members. We have to be able to bring in new faces so that everyone feels welcome, as both Lane and Charles said, affirmed, which is so important. But also we build that sense of belonging. When we lead with inclusion, we're leading with our hearts, and that builds belonging. And then those internal issues are things within our own community, but we also have this external kind of thing that's out there called conservative Christianity. And I think we're doing a great job on the ground being able to change hearts and change minds and really tell some of those folks who misread the Bible that the Jesus that they should be following loved us all. And he would have been advocating to stop the trans hate bill that was put in our General Assembly. He would advocate for more equality within our workforce development, within our parenting and adoption, within our school system. So those are the biggest challenges that I see, but I'm so encouraged because we have amazing people like Phil, like yourself, Emily, like Charles, and like Lane out there who are doing the work. So I'm very encouraged, even though there are challenges.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just want to let everyone on the call know that there is a great group, a great coalition called South Carolina United for Justice and Equality, and they have tons of resources on their websites. They keep you updated about legislation. They'll let you know about groups and other resources that can help you feel welcomed and affirmed if that's something that you need, or if you're looking to affirm and support the LGBTQ plus community. So definitely check them out as well. Thank you. All right, we're going to move to some roundtable questions. So I want to hear from each of you for these questions. I'm going to start with Lane for the first one. How can allies stand up, but also stand out?
So to me, there is a lot that allies can do as far as normalizing certain things that will make life easier for trans people, and also, you know, I think for LGBT people, but for trans people especially, things like normalizing talking about pronouns, for example, you know, making sure that pronouns in introductions or bios or email signatures or whatever it may be, on name tags, you know, that's not just something that is for trans people, that it's something that just, you know, sort of everyone sort of includes, that makes it sort of easier to accept and easier for us, you know, not to feel othered and not to feel like pressured to out ourselves, you know, immediately. Normalizing just, you know, simple things like the existence of trans identities themselves, and gender nonconformity itself. You know, so like I talk to a lot of people about, well, how are young people going to understand this? How are kids going to understand this? Especially since I'm non-binary and I'm a teacher. People always ask me that question. Well, how doesn't it confuse the kids? And I'm like, not really, actually. Like, I just, you know, you just explain it and the kids are like, so it's like this? And you're like, yeah. And they're like, oh, okay. And once it's normalized for them, you know, they sort of, it's like they go throughout the rest of their lives. Like, there's nothing that makes me happier than when a student of mine has come to understand something about gender from knowing me. And then when they meet another trans person, they just roll with it because it's just a part of life for them now. And I think that that's something that allies can really support us with. And I also think, when it comes to kids as well, just talking to your kids, about the existence of gender nonconformity and trans identities. And, every once in a while I'll be out somewhere and a little kid, it's always a little kid will be like, "Mom, is that a boy or a girl?" And their parents are like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," and I'm like, "No, it's okay. Like, that's an okay thing for them to ask. And like, let's have a conversation about it." And it makes me so happy when I see people who just openly have those conversations with their kids, because those little things like that may not seem, like big shows of allyship, that's what we really need in order to sort of like change the society that we live in to a place where we'll be more safe and comfortable being out.
That's amazing. Thank you. Charles, what are your thoughts?
I agree 100% with Elaine. It's brilliant. And I think we can actually tie this back to education as well as just advocacy and a conversation. So when someone's telling you, this is how I identify and this is what it means, and you listen to them and you respect them and you understand them and you affirm them, right? It's kind of the same thing with education, oftentimes one of the best forms of education is just opening up Wikipedia and then starting to read and read and read, and then going to local resources and then talking to LGBTQ people, and then really understanding how basically everything kind of not necessarily works, but how everything is, and basically understanding more about the people and about us and things about that. I also think, really a big thing that, allies can really do to stand out is, advocating and taking action. Emily, I really want to highlight you because like you've done an amazing job going up to the State House and defending youth's rights, defending trans youth, defending LGBTQ people. And oftentimes it really just takes one or two allies in someone's life, whether they be an adult or a child, really to make a huge difference in just being affirmed and being loved for who they are. It's a big way of standing out. It only takes a little bit. And honestly, it's just coming from a place of understanding, respect, and affirming. So, it's really phenomenal. You can advocate in many different ways. You can advocate just by saying, "Hey, I understand you," or let's have a conversation and let's get to know each other and stuff like that. Or you can start working with different groups. In Columbia, I'm very grateful that we have a bunch of city council people who want to listen and learn and come to basically LGBTQ spaces to listen and to learn and to watch and things like that. So really, allyship is how you make it, how you interact with the community, and you can always work on being an ally. And even the smallest actions make huge differences in people's lives.
That is the truth. Eli, your thoughts?
I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I totally want to just co-sign on Charles and Lane and the way Lane handled that situation. I wish we can replicate that, because that's so beautiful when people want to have a conversation and don't take offense. So Lane, I want to highlight you. That's beautiful because you're passing on that education piece. Instead of becoming guarded, you're using your experiences to share and to grow the community. So that, I just got moved. That's awesome. So thank you for that. To me, it's about showing up. You got to be present for your friends. It's a hug. It's a pat on the back. It's a, I feel you. I'm sorry you're going through that. It's being present for the community. Like Charles said, it's advocating when we see discriminatory policies being put forth. Education is always key. Our community is constantly evolving. When I came out in college, pronouns were not, I'm dating myself now, pronouns were not something that was actively talked about. Coming out wasn't really actively talked about, and it's so encouraging to see how much we've grown. So as we grow as a community, allies should grow with us. We want to see them join us and grow with us. But I also, and I say this from a unique perspective because I usually tell my friends as a minority in terms of my race, allies cannot rely on the LGBT community to be their encyclopedia. We are not here to teach you all the time. We need to teach you, but you have to be willing to do the work on your own. Like Charles said, Wikipedia, then source it, fact it, and then come and ask questions. Our job is not to just lay it all out there for you, but to engage in conversations with a willing partner. And then last, I think we have to be able to realize where we have privilege as allies and then take accountability. If we make a mistake, we own it and learn from it. People are going to make mistakes with pronouns. We have to be patient with them. We have to encourage them, but then we have to demand that they learn from their mistakes and don't continue to make those mistakes, because that's the oppressive societal behavior that has kept the LGBTQ plus community stigmatized. So those are just some examples I would give to allies, but definitely what Lane and Charles said are right on point.
Absolutely. That was so beautiful from the three of you. Thank you. And I want to throw it out there to the Facebook world that if you have questions, I should have said this earlier, feel free to drop them in the chat. At the end, we will give some time. So if any of our speakers have inspired you with a question or anything, please feel free to let them know. My next question for the group, and I'm going to start with Eli, is what are some unique challenges that you face within your community that you don't think heterosexual or cisgender folks are aware of?
I'm muted, so that's a great question. Thank you for that. I think we see, and we kind of highlighted this, that family is so important. So one of the unique challenges that I want to talk about with the community is parenting. So the LGBTQ plus community, parenting in America is a stigma. But we learn that children are more influenced by their interactions with their parents than their parents' sexual orientation. So it kind of goes to that point that Lane was talking about earlier, when they are interacting with their students, they're able to show them an authentic person and has nothing to do with their sexual identity or how they define themselves in an orientation facet. And that's why it's really powerful that folks in our community have children and become parents if that's something that they're interested in. Adoption is also something that a lot of folks that are in the cisgender and heterosexual community don't understand the difficulties that folks in the LGBTQ plus community have. 4 times as likely our community to have adopted children in the home. Some of that is due to the difficulties in having biological children with same-sex couples, but that's also a show of community and community building that all of us have hit on. That is some of the unique challenges that I see. I'm at an age where I'm thinking about children at some point, not now, but down the road. And I want to be able to bring up my children without fear of being persecuted or stigmatized. So that is one of the biggest challenges that I see, that folks don't necessarily understand, but I do hope that they glean and learn some more information to support us in our efforts.
Absolutely. Lane, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm thinking about, this idea that has been brought up about being an encyclopedia for, for cisgender and heterosexual people. And thank you for, those who've said that you were inspired or moved by the way that I've handled those situations. I think sometimes the way I talk about it, I make it sound too easy, because on the one hand, it is something that is, that I see as very easy to explain to kids or to explain to people. But on the other hand, it can be a bit of a burden. And I always like to make sure that I tell people, even though I'm very open about my identity and I'm very open to answering questions about my identity, at the same time, allies shouldn't expect all LGBTQ people to be like that. You shouldn't expect all LGBTQ people to, be ready to answer any question about our identities and our lives just at any time. I think I have sort of made that choice in my life, as a teacher. Part of normalizing trans identities for my students, for me, that I think has been really successful, has been my willingness to answer questions. I always tell my students, I'll answer any question you have as long as it's appropriate for our teacher-student relationship and as long as you're not distracting from what we need to do in school. But it's like, on the one hand, I'm glad that I can do that. I'm glad that I can be the trailblazer, the first trans person they've ever known, the first teacher who goes by mix and they, them, and like, it's so interesting and they learn from it. But at the same time, it can be a little bit of a burden sometimes, because it is hard just to, it's hard sometimes just to sort of like, you want to go through just your daily life and, at every turn, there's someone asking like, well, are you sure it's okay for you to tell the kids who you are? Are you sure it's okay to tell the kids like, what you go by? Are you sure it's okay? Like, so it's like, on the one hand, I see it as a good thing and as a positive thing, but on the other hand, it can definitely be overwhelming. And I know a lot of other LGBTQ people who really don't want to be in that position. And I think that's completely valid. And so I think that's something that's important just for allies to think about, is like, what I tell people is, because people always think like, well, I just have a couple questions. And I'm like, yes, you just have a couple questions, but you need to think about it from my perspective. Everyone I meet just has a couple questions. So these are the questions I'm answering about myself every day, everywhere I go, like in every school that I've ever taught in, every class that I've had, like, you know what I mean? So it can definitely be overwhelming as well as rewarding. And with that, I also think that a lot of people don't understand the challenges we face as far as like workplace discrimination. I've talked to a lot of people about this issue who, they say, well, if you're discriminated against, then, you just need to tell HR, you just need to, do something about it and then fix it. And I'm like, it is far from that easy. Like it's very rarely, when you face workplace discrimination, it's very rarely something so overt that you're able to, clearly document it and go to HR and say, this exact thing happened. And they say, oh no, that shouldn't have happened. And then it's all better. It's so much more, it can be so much more like, I hate to use the word low key, but that's the word that's coming to mind, but it can just, it's little things like realizing that, people in your workplace all like talk to each other and get together and you're always left out of that. Or realizing that there are people who, even though you see them every day and you walk by them in the hallway every day, they never say hi to you, even if you say hi and you're like, what's with that? And then one day it clicks. Things like that. So, and I think that goes along too with this idea that we've all sort of talked about with building community. It can be really difficult to build community, especially, I'm in a Facebook group for LGBTQ teachers. And it's amazing to be able to connect with other educators who are LGBTQ. But for most of us in the group, we're the only LGBTQ teacher in our school. So it's like, it's great that we have this way to build community, on the internet, but within like our sort of day-to-day lives, we all have that feeling of being like the only one, of being the poster child for, LGBTQ teachers. And that can be, like I said, it can be rewarding, but it can also be hard.
I'm sure I can't put myself in that situation. I can't relate, but I appreciate you sharing that insight. I think that that's so important for people to hear. So thank you for sharing that with us. Charles, what are your thoughts?
So I agree completely with Lane, especially on workplace discrimination. That's been a big issue, especially here in South Carolina, for a long time. In addition, discrimination in general, but especially with healthcare access. I've told people before, but we're really living through our second pandemic. And for LGBTQ people, we're still living in our second pandemic. We have the HIV pandemic that no one talks about, that we are still living through. And because of discrimination from the healthcare standpoint, a lot of people don't know what safe sex is, or they don't know how to have it, or condoms are out of reach for them. PrEP is out of reach for them. That's basically that helps prevent HIV infections. Other things like being able to go and get a simple STD, STI testing is often just impossible for them. In South Carolina, you know, we're one of the epicenters of the current HIV pandemic. And a lot of people don't realize that it's continued a problem ever since, you know, it's always been a problem, and the state itself isn't really doing much to actually take care and help LGBTQ people in terms of the HIV pandemic. And there are lots of parallels with access to healthcare that we see right now with the COVID pandemic that is still occurring with the HIV pandemic. In addition, access to gender affirming care and gender affirming medical care, therapy, things like that, they're hard to come by. For a long time, and I'm not sure if this is the case still, but for a long time in Columbia, we'd have to refer people who want to, you know, start transitioning and things like that down to Charleston. And that's a 2-hour drive. For many people, you know, they don't have access to doctors who are LGBTQ friendly, or any medical professionals who are LGBTQ friendly. You know, I faced discrimination just going to USC health labs and saying, hey, I'd really like an STI panel, please. And stuff like that. You know, I really think healthcare itself is one of the most important things that, you know, we as people, you know, we want to take care of our health, whether it be mental health or physical health. And both of those in South Carolina for LGBTQ people are really hard to come by. Currently in South Carolina too, in Columbia specifically, we are trying to ban basically fake therapies such as conversion therapy that a lot of LGBTQ people are basically subjected to. You know, oftentimes their parents or their family members don't realize how harmful it is and how much it does to really break down someone's psyche, as well as just cause so many issues to the person themselves. The part of the reason why a lot of people in South Carolina and in Columbia, such as myself and Dylan Gunnels and SC United, are advocating for the basically the conversion therapy ban, because it's so detrimental to people's health care, and people's health, people's mental health, and people don't realize that. So I definitely say healthcare is one of the biggest issues for LGBTQ people in South Carolina.
Thank you for shining that light, Charles. I don't think a lot of people are aware of some of those health barriers that still stand in the way. And for the allies out there listening, I want to make it clear to you that it is not our place as allies to ask our LGBTQ friends, family, and loved ones to bear their trauma on us. They all have lived experiences that are unique to them, that have led them to where they are in their lives. And it's our job to understand that they bring that to the table, whether they openly share that or not. Once somebody trusts you and knows that you're a true ally, they are more than willing to share and have a shoulder to lean on and have that support. But it is not their job to bear that trauma for us. Lane, you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I just was thinking, I just wanted to add something to that. I think it's important for people to realize, like, it's okay to ask questions, but I wish more people would ask a question with the understanding that if I say, you know, I don't really feel like going into that right now, or that's too personal or whatever, that they're just like, okay, I get it. And I think that, you know, because a lot of allies are sort of like, well, I want to learn about this, and I know that they're coming from a good place. They want to learn about the issues that we face. They want to learn about our experiences so that they can be better allies. And that's amazing, because on the one hand, yes, you should go look up more information. On the other hand, it does make sense if, you know, you're not finding an answer that you need to find about something specific, that you might want to ask one of us. But I would just encourage people, to ask in the spirit of learning, and also ask and just say up front, I'm wondering about this, but if you don't want to talk about it, I understand. Or, I would like to ask about this, but if you're not comfortable, that's okay. And sort of like leave that open for us to, decide how comfortable we are, sort of in that moment or with that issue.
I appreciate that addition, Lane. Thank you. All right, our third roundtable question. I'm going to start with Charles. Outside of Pride Month, which June gets plastered in rainbows, right? And everyone comes out to events and everyone has roundtables and we all want to show how great allies we are. How can we as allies keep the focus on LGBTQ plus issues and show our alliance outside of the month of June?
That is a phenomenal question, and I think it's one of the most important questions. We get this huge focus on Pride Month. All the companies immediately change to rainbow banners in the month of June, and then suddenly, as soon as July comes, everything's kind of publicly gone. So what I would recommend is, again, finding local LGBTQ organizations, finding basically different advocacy groups and getting involved with them. That's really where, allyship and just basically working towards making the state a better place to live really comes in. So, June isn't just the most, isn't just Pride Month. It's every year is Pride. Every month is Pride Month. And so just getting involved with organizations and, really fighting for good legislation to really help LGBTQ people, I think it's phenomenal. So that's definitely how I would do it, is, making sure that you know what's going on in the state, you find your advocacy groups, and you just get involved. So
great, thank you. Lane?
Yeah, I think that my answer is pretty similar, just about, paying attention to our issues all year long. And I think that one way to do that, and this might seem obvious to a lot of people, but I think it's something that a lot of allies could stand to do more of, is, look at your social media and think sort of critically about the people and the pages that you follow, and think about how many LGBTQ people and organizations and things like that are you following, pages and people who post about these concerns all year long, not just in June, because there are so many people and pages and everything out there that you can follow who do post about these issues all the time. It's been interesting, like the last few days, just to see, like so many pages are being like, okay, well, for Pride Month, every day we're going to post, one LGBTQ person or whatever. And those of us who do this all year are just like, well, for Pride Month, I'm going to keep doing the same thing I do all the time because this is my life and this is what I always post about, what I always share about. So just sort of like applying that critical lens, I guess, to what you notice and what you follow, and making sure that you are following the right people so that you do hear about things. Because a lot of times that's what I hear allies say, well, I hadn't heard about it. I hadn't heard about this law that was being proposed, or I hadn't heard about this, this issue that happened. And I'm like, well, you have to follow the right people and the right things to hear about it. So that's something that I would challenge all allies to, to notice. And obviously, these things, I talk a lot about like the internet and then like, social media, but that's just sort of my strength. I have built a lot of community online over the years. And I also, I've lived all over the country at this point. So I have friends sort of everywhere. So the internet is just sort of, I joke that like I live on the internet. I interact with people more on the internet than I do in person, for better or for worse. But it gives us this way to sort of like build community and this way to hear about things that are going on, that we might otherwise just not know about at all.
I think that's a great point. It goes back to educating ourselves, right? Wikipedia post, or just start following some Facebook pages and getting information that way. Absolutely. Let's round this question out with Eli.
Well, thank you. I really want to just highlight what the other panelists said. I think you have to be able to engage on a meaningful level, which is authentic to you with an LGBTQ organization. I want to plug the great work Charles is doing with the Young Dems. The caucus that I just got elected to 2 weeks ago is the statewide LGBTQ caucus. Join us, but also the Hancock Center, which is one of the best in the nation. Just the work that they've done, the selfless work for many, many years without a paycheck. But also 8 Upstate. We need to find these groups that don't get highlighted often. And then find different organizations than what everyone picks in the normal wheel of who are we going to go with today? Like Gender Benders in the Upstate is one of the most unique and affirming organizations that I've worked with. Charleston Black Pride and Gina Mocha, or Upstate Pride run by the amazing Caroline Caldwell, a Black female who is changing the way that young Black females are interacting with their identities, and they're able to see someone and model what it looks like to be free. So find those new organizations that don't always get highlighted. We have to pay attention to legislation, whether that's in the General Assembly with Save Women's Sports Act, or the craziness that happens where I live in Greenville County with the anti-LGBT resolution that we had with our county council. We really have to focus on municipalities all the way up to Congress, which is what we need to be advocating for. Everyone that's listening, all of us on this call should be calling and saying, we need the Equality Act now. And lastly, the best thing that we can do is work our network. We need to connect the need for equality, for inclusion, and for equity for our community with our friends and family. That doesn't just happen in June, that needs to happen 12 months out of the year. It needs to happen on a daily basis. It starts with one person, and when we radiate out the strength and the support that each of us has for our community, we're going to change people, and 1 becomes 2, and we grow. So those are some things that I really want to highlight that we should be doing and executing outside of June, even though Pride Month is fabulous. And I wish every month was Pride Month.
Absolutely. And there is a great group called Southern Equality, which highlights legislation across the South in the country. So although we are fortunate here that our anti-trans legislation did not proceed this session, it highlights legislation in other states that maybe we need to be on the lookout for that might be heading our way, because the trend seems to be what one does, the rest follow. So it kind of gives us a place to pull from experiences of other states and other legislatures and saying, all right, we got to be ready. This fight might be coming for us. So arming ourselves with that knowledge proactively and preemptively as we head into the next legislative session in January. Awesome. Thank you all so much. We have a few questions from the audience. The first question is specifically for Elaine. Have parents shown support for you as their child's teacher, or have you run into any issues?
That's a complicated question. And it's been interesting over the years. So I have taught in Beaufort County in South Carolina. Before that, I taught in Savannah. And before that, I taught in Maryland. And in Maryland, I taught in a couple of different counties. So it's definitely been sort of a different experience everywhere that I've taught and everywhere that I've been. And I have had, I guess, I don't know, the privilege, the luck, whatever you want to call it, to teach in some schools and some districts that were very supportive. But I have also had some difficulties as well. When I was a student teacher in Maryland, I actually was asked to leave my student teaching position because of my identity, which at the time was completely against the law in Maryland. There was a non-discrimination law in Maryland. but a parent had complained that they didn't want their children learning about alternative pronouns and alternative identities. And the school's solution was just to ask me to leave. The university, of course, worked with me to find another placement, but that delayed my graduation by a semester. And that was a really difficult experience. I have had a few issues, over the years where parents have brought up concerns about me talking openly to students about my identity and my usually the issues sort of center around this idea of like teaching their kids about gender or teaching their kids about like alternative identities. And I always explain that, that this is not a part of my lesson. Like it's not, like the first week of school when I first meet new students, I do take a little bit of time to explain, because I think I obviously have to. Students walk through the door and they say miss and they say ma'am and they say she. And so I take a little bit of time to sort of explain, like, this is who I am. I go by mix. I go by they, them. This is what that means. But beyond that sort of first conversation that we have, it's not a part of my lesson plan. It's not a part of, anything that I'm focused on. So that's definitely a conversation that I've had to have a few times. And I have mostly, I think, over the years had very supportive administrators and supportive teams that I've worked with, but it hasn't always been the case. I will say I don't know if I want to go into a lot of detail about that, just sort of considering my current position. So that's all I'll say on that. But yeah, it has been an issue at times, but it has also been, I've also had, good experiences as well. I've had parents who I have, worked closely with their children, and they've told me, when I first met you, I wasn't so sure about this, but you care about my kid, you help my kid. And so I don't care what your identity is or who you are, like, as a person, because I can tell that you care about my kid and making sure that they're successful. And that's really what parents want. That's what I found to be true generally across the board, is once you show parents that, that you're really just there to teach, and because you love kids and you love helping kids learn, they can see past that part of your identity for the most part.
Absolutely right. Your and my goal is exactly the same, right? We want to educate and have the best impact on our students as possible. And that has nothing to do with who we are. So thank you for sharing that with us. We have a question for the group, which I'm very excited to hear the answers to. Can you recommend an author or book for allies, which either deepens our understanding of the challenges or, of equal importance, celebrates the joys of the LGBTQ lived experiences? Eli, do you have any suggestions to share with us?
Yeah, so I love doing books on tape, but I actually purchased the book called Hola Papi, and it's kind of a funny, it celebrates, I wouldn't say it deepens understanding, and more of it's a fun way to look into the lived experience of someone that's a gay man, Hispanic, going through this struggle of trying to find his identity. So that's one amazing book. Another one that we pass around with my community of gay male friends is 100 Boyfriends. It's really funny. It's a bunch of short stories talking about the different types of people we have in our community. We don't just have beefy guys or people in beards or really skinny guys. We come in all shapes and sizes and have all different backgrounds. And something that I love, this is something that I did with our interns here at the GCDP, is Let the Record Show. Sarah Schulman is an author, and it kind of goes through the AIDS epidemic, how New York City was the epicenter of a lot of the pride kind of things that we do now, like celebrating, rallying, advocating. That really started in New York City with a committed group of mostly transgender people fighting for their rights. So those are just some three. I like to read and laugh. I like to read as an escape. So I like fun books. So those first two are more fun and playful, but Sarah's book is really, really great kind of insight into New York and a lot of the challenges that we faced in the late 80s and early 90s.
Both of those are important, the fun side and the informative and deeper, more serious side. So thank you. Charles, do you have any recommendations for us?
I do. So I'm currently reading The Gay Revolution by Lillian Faderman. And it's really, really great. She basically covers all of the different histories, basically from the 1950s to almost present day, about LGBTQ people and their rights, our rights, and basically kind of like the entire history of it. And I think it's a really good kind of primer for people really to kind of learn where we're coming from, if that makes sense. So like how the 1950s leads into the stuff we advocate for now today. I think it's phenomenal. So I definitely highlight the gay revolution. So
awesome, thank you. Lane, any recommendations for us?
Yeah, so I have one book that I always recommend to people who are looking for information about supporting trans kids, which is, a question that I get asked a lot. There's a book that's called The Transgender Child. It has two authors, and I know one of them is Stephanie Brill and the other is escaping my mind right now. But it's an amazing book that is based in sort of like all of the research that we have available about sort of like the development of transgender children and best practices about how to support them at every stage from like the youngest stages all the way up through teenagers. And it talks about how to support them as parents, as family members, how to support them as educators, how to support them as healthcare providers. It's amazing and very comprehensive. I think it's something that every educator definitely should read, and anyone who is working with trans kids in any way should read. I also recently found out that they've published a second book, the same authors, called The Transgender Teen, that's specifically focused on teenagers and their needs. But what I love about it is that it's so based in, the research that's available. And then the other author or book that I would recommend, a lot of people in the community will know this author, David Levithan, is an amazing author who has written a lot of young adult books about LGBTQ teens. My favorite is a book called Every Day, which features a narrator who is non-binary and who is actually never specifically gendered, which is very unusual in literature. And as a non-binary person, reading that book was really affirming to read something from the perspective of a narrator, a main character who, it wasn't framed as like coming from male or female to non-binary, but it was just this person is non-binary from the beginning. I would recommend that to anyone as well.
I love that you brought up a set of YA books, because as a teacher, one of the big things that I believe in is having representation on your shelves. And I think anyone who works with children, whether you have your own children or you work with them in a professional capacity, and you're not entirely sure how to answer some of their questions, picture books can be a great way to do that. There are so many out there. Just to name a few, Poppy is a Princess come to mind, Pink is for Boys. There are so many. Jack, Not Jackie. I could go on and on. So if anyone is interested in any of the myriads of picture books that are out there, we're happy to point you in the right direction as well.
I just want to add to that, Emily, that I think it's super important in general that, people like us, like teachers, but also parents, that they have those books available for kids, not just like when you find out that a kid is questioning their gender or their sexual orientation or whatever the case may be, but just have those books, like you said, on your shelf in your classroom, or have those books as some of the books that you have for your kids, so that those representations are already there, so that they don't have to spend that time, as you know, as so many LGBTQ people did when we were kids, wondering just sort of like, what is this? What's wrong with me? You know, what's going on? But just sort of like having it present in their lives as just another type of person.
Absolutely. And even if that person doesn't end up being part of the LGBTQ plus community, it allows them that education. It allows them that place to experience and explore and get that knowledge. So I couldn't agree more. We have one last question for tonight, right on time to wrap up. The last question is for Eli. Eli, can you spend some time touching on what the SCDP LGBTQ Caucus does and how somebody who isn't super politically involved might be able to get involved with the caucus and make a difference?
Well, thank you for that question. And I just took over, and I'm very fortunate to have an amazing co-chair, Andrea Benjara Robinson. So I want to thank her for her work. And ways that people can get involved is just reach out to us. I will give you all my number. We can release it on the Facebook. I'll give you my email. Call us, communicate with us. I want to make sure that everyone feels that they have a place to feel a sense of belonging, a place that they feel affirmed. And the LGBTQ caucus, the way that we want to execute it is that it's a place to fellowship. It's a place to bring people together. Lane said it earlier, that might be electronically or virtually, but we also want to build in regional hubs where people in the Low Country can go grab some dinner or some coffee or a beer and be with other people, that they don't feel that they have to mask themselves or conform to how society often wants us to be. We can just be our authentic selves. We also want to advocate. We've seen some great work by Phil. Emily, you got highlighted. You're kicking some butt, girl. Charles, what you're doing. And there's so many others. We want to be able to advocate. But part of advocacy is teaching our elected officials. Most of them are older, and it's no shade against them. The LGBTQ conversations were very different when they were growing up. And that's not they're bad and we're good. It's we have to do our part to educate them and say, this is where society needs to be headed. These are issues that Lane is facing, that Charles is facing, that I'm facing. And we need your support. Because when you have conversations and you build that genuineness of spirit, people will see you mean business, and people will see you have a passion, and that passion needs to be acted on. And lastly, the LGBTQ caucus wants to be able to support our community. We want to highlight the Harriet Hancock Center. We want to highlight these places and push people to volunteer there. Our caucus is one entity. We cannot do it alone. And there are so many others that have been doing work before I was even born. So my job is to not put us in the forefront. It's to grow with everyone else that's doing the work and make sure we find a home and a fit, because we're stronger together. So I really want to encourage everyone to reach out, whether that's to Emily or Kathleen or Lane and Charles. I want to stay connected. Charles, I know we know. Lane, I want to stay connected. You're amazing. So I want to be able to build that network around the state so we can call each other. We show up in Columbia and there's a force, and they know we mean business. So, and I want to thank you, Emily, for hosting, and the other panelists. I learned so much, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel with y'all.
Thank you so much. Yeah, when we were up in Columbia earlier this month, Lane was with me. We actually heard from a state senator who said, you know, I really just don't know a lot about this. And thankfully, he has some younger daughters who have really shined a light on the importance of getting more knowledge and being more informed before voting on some of these very important decisions. So we definitely need to keep being a voice in their ear to help them learn and push them in the right direction. So I thank you all so much for the work that you're doing to make that a reality. Thank you for just being amazing people, and thank you for spending time with us tonight. Our community is so grateful to have been able to learn from each of you, and we know this will not be the last that we see of you. And those of you who are looking for Pride events throughout the month, you now have some great people to friend on Facebook who I'm sure will be sharing some amazing resources throughout the month of June and beyond. Thank you all so much. Have a great night.